Judges chapter 2, verse 1, Mark.
Now the angel of the Lord came up from Gilgal to Bochim, and he said, I brought you up out of Egypt and led you into the land which I have sworn your fathers. And I said, I will never break my covenant with you.
The beginning of this chapter, chapter 2, verses 1 through 15, is a historical overview. It's a historical review of the Israelite invasion of Canaan and the death of Joshua. Now, as a footnote, there are at least 3 different Gilgals mentioned in the Bible. Besides the famous one, which is on the Medeba map, there are Gilgals not only located next to Jericho, but they're in the Sharon Plain, and they're in the vicinity of Bethel. What is a Gilgal? What is a Gilgal? Now, it means wheel or round, and in Arabic, it means necklace. It can mean necklace. And an oval shape. Basically, when you read the Bible and you read about Gilgals, I think you should understand them as temporary military bases at strategic locations in Canaan where the Israelites could return for physical and spiritual refreshment from their sorties against the Canaanites. Now, the messenger in these verses is going to perform a short history lesson, and he reminds the tribes of the unconditional Abrahamic covenant in Genesis chapter 15. Verse 2. Lane?
You shall not make a covenant with the people of this land, but you shall break down their altars. Yet you have disobeyed me. Why have you done this?
The prime example of making a league with the inhabitants of the land, making a league with the seed of the serpents, is of course the pact, the record with the Gibeonites in Joshua chapter 9. Now, Genesis 1 to 11, of course, is the foundation of the faith. And it is often, those early chapters are often used by later writers of the Bible as motifs or patterns on how they create their narrative. That is to say, Genesis chapter 3 is a good example. Genesis chapter 3, you have the adversary who's acting subtly, just as the Gibeonites do in Joshua 9, chapter 9, verse 4. The adversary, by the way, Satan literally means prosecuting attorney. Satan means prosecuting attorney. Not only that, Satan changes his outward appearance as the men of Gibeon do in Joshua chapter 9, verse 5. They both move or slither into the camp of the people of God. They both lie. And after that pact, a fall account ensues. The messenger here, he chastises Israel for disobeying God's clear command of totally destroying the seed of the serpent in Deuteronomy 7, 1 and 2. They did not totally annihilate every single Canaanite like they were supposed to in the land, like Ron brought up earlier. Okay? And because they didn't do that and lived in harmony with them instead, they're being chastised for that here. Verse number 3, Ron.
Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you. The day shall be as thorns in your side, and their rods shall be a snare unto you.
The messenger here is quoting from the section in Exodus that gives the instructions and the promises concerning the conquest of the land in Exodus 23, 29, and 30. But I will not drive them out in a single year, that is the inhabitants of the land of Canaan, because the land would become too desolate and the wild animals too numerous for you. Little by little I will drive them out before you until you have increased enough to take possession of the land. Now, thorns are the outward symbol of the curse of Eden. The next time, that of course appears in Genesis chapter 3, thorns. The next time thorns appears is in Exodus 3, which is, of course, the burning bush, and the word for burning bush is Seneh, transliterated S-E-N-E-H, which is a thorny bush. So the symbol of the curse, the next time it appears, God is in the midst of that symbol of the curse. And there's many other examples, but of course it is noteworthy to mention what is on the head of Jesus. The crown of thorns are the symbol of the curse. Very nice. Very nice. Yes. Matthew 27:29. Verse 4, John.
As soon as the angel of the Lord spoke these words to all the people of Israel, the people lifted up their voices and wept.
So realizing a fact that they must bear as a nation because of their cause, which is their sin. That is to say, their disobedience. The nation sheds tears with great humiliation, great grief. Similarly, when the children of Israel earlier, much earlier, at Kadesh Barnea, expressed their unbelief at the report of the spies, they also as a nation lifted up their voice and wept. Numbers 14:1. That night all members of the community raised their voices aloud and wept. Verse number 5, Mark.
So they named the place Bochim, and there they sacrificed to the Lord.
The site of Bochim has been suggested by some to be located in the Judean wilderness, between Gilgal and Bethel. So between here and there. The place name Bochim, which we read about in this verse, of course, it means weeping, and it was obviously the site was obviously given this name after the event happened. This is the only recorded nation sacrifice, the only recorded nation sacrifice to Yahweh on behalf of the children of Israel since they entered into the land of Canaan, except the ceremony of the blessings and the cursings, which they did with Joshua on Mount Ebal, in Joshua 8:31. Now, this verse, this ends the prologue, or the introductory section of this chapter. Verse number 6.
After Joshua had dismissed the Israelites, they went to take possession of the land, each to their own inheritance.
So it's suggested here that the prologue of this chapter is indeed a retelling. This is a retelling of the last chapter of Joshua, in Joshua chapter 24. Because in 24:28, then Joshua dismissed the people, each to their own inheritance. Same thing, same verbiage. After Joshua was charged to the nation, he, quote unquote, let the people depart every man unto his own inheritance. The same exact wording is used in this verse. If these are the same event, which they probably are, we should then instead surmise that Bochim be closer to the vicinity of Shechem, because that's where the event in Joshua chapter 24 took place. Verse 7. Brian?
The people served the Lord all the days of Joshua, all the days of the elders that outlived Joshua. He received all the great works of the Lord he did for Israel.
So to further solidify the above reading that this is indeed a retelling of the last chapter of Joshua, this verse is essentially a direct quote to the epilogue of the book of Joshua, Joshua 24:31. Israel served the Lord throughout the lifetime of Joshua and of the elders who outlived him and who had experienced everything the Lord had done for Israel. Basically, you're just copying and pasting the verse. Verse 8. John.
And Joshua the son of Nun, the servant of the Lord, died at the age of 110 years.
As the book of Joshua began with the death of Moses. Joshua 1:1, right? Now after the death of Moses, it came to pass that Joshua, ... So as the book of Joshua begins with the death of Moses, so the scene between Joshua and Judges becomes evident, as here we have the death of Joshua. Joshua is the only other person directly mentioned in the Hebrew Bible as being the servant of the Lord, besides Moses. Indirectly, and there it is right there, Ebed Yahweh on the screen. Indirectly, in the subheading of Psalm 18 and the subheading of Psalm 36, David is also called by the same title in the subheading, which, well, we won't go there. Verse number 9.
And they buried him in the territory of his inheritance in Timnath-Heres, in the hill country of Ephraim, north of Mount Gaash. Gaash.
Like other heroes of the early Israelite faith, Joseph, Joshua was laid to rest in the region of Ephraim. God was faithful to his covenant and had given Joshua his allotted land, just like he said to Caleb, right? Joshua and Caleb, the only two. Now, you can visit the supposed tomb of Joshua today. There it is. I mean, we know where Timnath-Serah is in the verse. It's right here. Everyone knows where it is. But you can visit the supposed tomb of Joshua today, though it is, the visible structure is an Ottoman period, 1517 to 1917 AD Nebi, or tomb. It's a Muslim shrine as well, and it is located deep in the West Bank village of Kifil-Heres, and nevertheless, under military protection, many Jews visit the shrine on the annual commemoration of his death, which is on the 26th day of Nisan. Ron, can you search when the 26th day of Nisan is this year, so I can have a birthday cake for remembering Joshua? The 26th of Nisan, Adar, Nisan. I'm gonna go with April.
N-U-N?
N-I-S-A-N. 26th. Nisan 26. When was that this year, or was it next year? All right, we'll keep going while I find that Hebrew date. I'm going with April. That's what I'm shooting for. April 8th. Just a shot. Okay, verse 10.
After that whole generation had been gathered to their ancestors, another generation grew up who knew neither the Lord nor what he had done for Israel.
All right, thank you. Some have suggested that the death of Joshua took place between 1370 and 1367 BC. All right? 1370 and 1367 BC. Which would thereby place his death and the death of the elders of Israel within the time frame of the Abiru. Who are the Abiru? Well, it depends who you ask. They're a people group in the land of Canaan who are causing problem and havoc and uprising against the Egyptian authorities in the 14th century. Now, if the Abiru are the Hebrews, which means Marini says they're not, and I'm sure he's right, but if this is correct, then we can better understand the political climate within Canaan at the time of Akhenaten. And we can perceive why the Israelites were able to temporarily take Gaza and Ashkelon. And that's a picture of Akhenaten, because remember, Egypt's weak at this time, and their strong hand cannot go and hold Gaza. Right?
if that were the case, 1370 BC, how can Judges be dated at 1000?
Well, I guess it depends when you date it.
Or could someone that's writing Judges have added some verbiage as they modify the book or
I
work
think
with the book?
that's a good question, the chronology. You know, and I think we'll see once we get to, I think, chapter 10. I think there it's a pretty strong argument that the events of the book take place. We can bookend it to something like 300-year time period, give or take. And I think it makes a pretty good case for that. So if it were 300 plus years from the time of the first judge, Othniel, who doesn't start until chapter whatever, 2 or 3, right? We're still 1370, 1367, still kind of, you know, it's a possibility.
I see. And it's at April the 15th.
April the 15th, that was close. Okay, thank you. All right. Ron, can you read chapter 2, verse 11, please?
And the children of Israel did evil in the sight of the Lord and served Balaam.
From the author's perspective, the second generation of Israelites in the land, of Canaan were an ungrateful and disobedient lot who returned again, like their fathers did in Sinai, back to Baal worship. Verse 12, John.
And they abandoned the Lord, the God of their fathers, who had brought them out of the land of Egypt. They went after other gods from among the gods of the peoples who were around them, and bowed down to them, and they provoked the Lord to anger.
This account begins the reoccurring pattern throughout the entire book of Judges. This is like, that's the question. What is the reoccurring pattern in the book of Judges? Now, someone devised a memory hook or a mnemonic referred to as the 4 S's to help remember this reoccurring pattern. And they are first, sin, second, servitude, third, supplication, fourth, salvation. So number 1, they sin as a nation, which is basically verse 12, okay? Then secondly, servitude. That means they come under the heavy hand of a different empire or a different people group. They're subdued. Third, supplication. They ask God for help. And then fourth and finally, salvation. A judge is raised up to deliver them from the heavy hand of their oppressor. Okay? Verse 13. Verse 13.
So they forsook the Lord and served Baal and that Ashtaroth.
Baal used 62 times in the Old Testament. And how many times in the New Testament? Just once. Just once.
Probably Revelation.
Just once. I think Paul uses it. It means, of course, Lord. And it could be represented in either an animalistic, like you're looking at, or a human form. In his human form, Baal is almost always portrayed with his right hand in the air in the smiting position, prepared as the god of rain and fertility to cast bolts of lightning. And like all the pharaohs of Egypt, every single statue of the pharaoh of Egypt, the left foot is in front of the right foot, as you can see here with the image of Baal. It's probably not only a theological statement, stepping into the afterlife, but a position of strength, physical strength. Romans 11:4. Romans 11:4. Yeah. Ashtaroth is used 11 times in the scriptures. This was his girlfriend, his female consort, whose name means star. star, and is specifically referred to as the quote-unquote goddess of the Sidonians. The Sidonians. This is the Phoenicians, Jezebel, these kind of people. 1 Kings 11:5. He followed Ashtaroth, the goddess of the Sidonians. Jeremiah refers to Ashtaroth as in Jeremiah 44:19, Queen of Heaven. Interestingly, it has been a long-standing Catholic tradition to refer to Mary as the Queen of Heaven. Which, if you ask Ron after class or sometime, you can kind of sum up just this recycling we have from the Tower of Babel basically to today with Baal and Ashtaroth, and they're just repackaged into ISIS and into Mary and into whoever, right? Throughout all of history. She's also the Queen of Heaven.
In his anger against Israel, the Lord gave them into the hands of raiders who plundered them. He sold them into the hands of their enemies all around, whom they were no longer able to resist.
Okay, so this verse marks the second phase of the pattern of the 4 S's. Servitude. The unique phrase describing the anger of the Lord here is that he was hot against Israel. It's only used in the book of Judges, which is interesting, that terminology. Verse 15, Ron, please.
Whatsoever they went out, the hand of the Lord was against them for evil, as the Lord had said, and as the Lord had sworn upon them, and they were greatly distressed.
The Hebrew word yad means hand, and it is often used figuratively to describe the authority or the power of a deity or a man. It is used in the scriptures both in a positive sense, like in Psalm 118:16, the Lord's right hand is lifted high, the Lord's right hand has done mighty things, and it is also, of course, used in a negative context, like in Isaiah 5:25, therefore the Lord's anger burns against his people, his hand is raised, and he strikes them down. The hand of the Lord. By the way, it's always the right hand, as you can see from that verse in 118:26 of the Psalter. Always the right hand. Why? Because the right hand in the world of the Bible is the clean hand. You clean yourself, you wipe yourself with this hand. You don't do that to someone. You don't reach out. It's always the right hand. It's the hand of power. It's I guess most people are right-handed anyways. And it's the clean hand as well. Verse 16, John.
And the Lord raised up judges who saved them out of the hand of those who plundered them.
Thank you. In this overview, this is an overview description of Israel's suppression by their adversaries. The author, and this is the only time he does it, guys, he apparently skips the third S, supplication, and goes to the last one, salvation. I think he only skips it here. Okay? Now, more importantly, the English translation judge for the Hebrew word shofat is a gloss definition, and it entails judging much more than the idea of judging. In a broader context, in addition to judging, judicial activity, the word also built into the word is the idea of defending. Defending, this is like a test question. What, the book of Judges, right? What does the word judge mean in Hebrew? And you would say, well, besides judicial activity, besides judging, right? It entails the idea of defending, delivering, avenging, and punishing.
And vindication.
What's that? Verse 17.
Yet they did not listen to their judges, for they played the harlot after other gods and bowed themselves down to them. They turned aside quickly from the way in which their fathers had walked in obeying the commandments of the Lord. They did not do as their fathers.
After the nation's deliverance from invading nations by the judge, the author lays out the pattern of the book. The author lays out the pattern of the book by beginning the cycle of the 4 S's again. The first one, sin. It's evident that the nation turned quickly from the way of their fathers. That is to say, the Mosaic Law. They turned quickly from keeping Torah. And they bowed themselves unto the idols of the Canaanites of the land. It was strictly forbidden, of course, to bow down and worship any image made in the likeness of someone or something. Thou shalt not bow down thyself to them, nor serve them, for I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God. Verse 18.
Whenever the Lord raised up a judge for them, he was with the judge and saved them out of the hands of their enemies as long as the judge lived. For the Lord relented because of their groaning under those who oppressed and afflicted them.
Okay, now, we'll dig into this later, but if we calculate correctly, the duration of a judge's tenure, like it'll say in Samson was judge over Israel for 20 years, or something like that, okay? We'll do it deeper in chapter 10, but if we calculate the duration of the judge's tenure without any overlapping, which we don't know if there was or there wasn't, I would think there probably was. But without any overlapping, the Lord raised up judges for around 250 years to govern Israel during the end of the Late Bronze Age and the beginning of Iron Age 1. The main theological reasoning behind the Lord repenting was the unconditional Abrahamic covenant. The unconditional Abrahamic covenant. Verse 19. Ron, 2:19.
It came to pass, when the judge was dead, that they returned and corrupted themselves more than their fathers, who followed other gods to serve them, and to bow down unto them. They ceased not from their undoings, not from their sudden ways.
Apparently, the judges also function as a sort of kind of spiritual ancestor to the prophets. Under the ministry of the judges, there was apparently some religious reform since the oppression ceased. And the national security of ancient Israel and their prosperity, their national security and their prosperity were linked to the obedience of the Torah. When the nation obeyed, they were blessed. When the nation disobeyed Torah, they were cursed. Deuteronomy 28. All right, guys, 4 more verses, and we're done for the night. 4 more verses. Verse number 20.
So the anger of the Lord was kindled against Israel, and he said, because this people have transgressed my covenant that I commanded their fathers, and have not obeyed my voice.
The nation of Israel did not have a fear of the Lord lifestyle. That is to say, they transgressed the law of Moses. They transgressed the Mosaic covenant given to their forefathers. And maybe even more specifically, they forsook the conditional land covenant in Deuteronomy 28 and 29. If you do this, I will bless you. If you do not do this, I will vomit you out of the land. Verse 21, Mark.
I also will no longer drive out before them any of the nations which Joshua left when he died.
Now, the quote-unquote hornet in Joshua 24:12. I sent the hornet ahead of you, which drove them out before you, also the 2 Amorite kings. You did not do it with your own sword and bow. The quote-unquote hornet which does not differ much from the word piercing. The word piercing, whatever that is, will no longer be sent before the Israelites to drive out their enemies from before them. Okay? 22, verse 22.
I will use them to test Israel and see whether they will keep the way of the Lord and walk in it as their ancestors did.
The quote-unquote them in verse number 22 here would comprise the main adversaries in the book of Judges, chiefly the Philistines, then all the Canaanites, the Phoenicians, the Hivites, etc. Now, in regards to understanding the geopolitical world of the pages of the Bible, okay, it is very helpful, but it's simple to understand it in terms of cats and mice. Mice are anyone in the Bible who ends in an ite. Hittite, Edomite, Hivite, Jebusite, whatever. The cats, depending on the ebb and flow of what's happening in the world, are Egypt, Babylon, Assyria, and Rome. Cats and mice, okay? Cats and mice. The mice are the nations placed in the regions by God in this verse. The mice are the nations placed in these regions by God in order to test his own people to see if they will indeed serve their God, the God of Israel. And then finally, one more verse tonight, chapter 2, verse 23. Ron, can you read that, please?
Therefore the Lord left those nations without driving them out hastily, neither delivered he them into the hand of Joshua.
So once again, in the early, very early stages of the book, we see that God is no longer taking the center stage, but participates in an unusually distant and kind of hands-off role to the events taking place in the Promised Land.